Hello everyone, today I will be presenting on Tahitian music and how it has evolved over time. And I have my reading text over here, but I will be skipping around quite a bit. When we think of Tahiti, we often think of white sandy beaches and glistening blue oceans, where people can sunbathe and forget about reality. We also picture the native people, often female, walking around in the typical tropical attire that features a grass skirt and a coconut bra. We tend not to think of paddle songs, the impressive sailing skills of the Tahitian ancient past, or even their stratified polyphonic choral music. In this paper, I will be discussing the history of Tahiti and how its cultural identity, particularly its music, has evolved over time to promote this generalized, stereotypical view that we now have of the island. Tahiti is located in the group of Society Islands in French Polynesia. Original settlement of this region was by groups of people from island Southeast Asia as far back as 3300 BC. Over several thousand years, the people managed to expand and settle across all of the islands. Tahiti remained isolated from foreign contact for thousands of years until 1606, when Pedro Fernandez de Quiros, pictured on the top, discovered the island. After his voyage, there was another long period of time with minimal European contact until the voyages of James Cook and Samuel Wallis, pictured here. In particular, Wallis's voyage initiated the process of European colonization of Tahiti, which brought about immense changes to their culture, which is extremely evident in the evolution of their music. Employing research from a larger project based in historical performance practice and historical ethnomusicology, today's presentation uses iconography, period genres, specific repertoires, and written evidence to demonstrate the significantly destructive influences of European colonialism on Tahitian musical identity. It was around the year 1000 BC when people started to colonize Tahiti, as indicated through archaeological evidence that shows intensification in agricultural practices. Due to the tropical climate that hosts a heavy wet season and a dry season for the rest of the year, the systems were adapted to fit both seasons. However, as the land was never allowed time to rest, the island suffered from overuse and deforestation. The native people experienced a severe lack of necessary resources for thousands of years, starting around the year 1400 AD. As a result, when Pedro Fernandez de Quiros made contact in 1606, his people reported that the land seemed uninhabitable and that the natives were assumed to be cannibals, which actually stemmed out of the xenophobic views and reports of the Europeans who had previously made contact with the Polynesian people on other islands. However, when his crew actually made contact with the natives, they were able to open up some trade, giving European resources in return for gifts of food or physical favors. In De Quiros' reports, we see the first written accounts of Tahitian music. This is an excerpt from his journal, The Voyages of Pedro Fernandez de Quiros. They all came singing to the sound of their paddles, one of them leading to whom the rest replied. They also gave us to understand, pointing with their fingers, that we should go to their port. What their object was, they knew. Many stood upright, and with arms and hands, legs and feet, and with their paddles, they made sounds with great dexterity, dances, and gestures. Their chief theme was music, and to show themselves joyful and merry before our ships. In this entry, we see the impressive sailing ability that the Tahitians possessed. The Polynesian people as a whole were very avid sailors, as they used these paddle boats to travel as well as to fish. Additionally, after the land had become overused, the native people had turned to sailing as their main means of gathering food. This shift fueled a type of music that helped the Tahitian men enjoy their work more, the do'alo. As Mariner describes in his personal account from Wallis's later exploration, an account of the natives of the Tonga Islands, the do'alo is a short song sung in canoes while paddling, with the strokes of the paddle being coincident with the cadence of the tune. As we saw earlier in De Quiros' account, the people would also dance with their paddles while standing in their boats. It wasn't until the 1760s that European explorers began making voyages to Tahiti with the intent of colonization. James Cook made 3 voyages to Tahiti between 1769 and 1779, from which we have documentation that shows evidence of musical practices of the time. One example is this copper plate engraved print of Tahitian dancers titled Danse de Tahiti. It depicts the type of dress that Tahitian dancers wore during such performances, as well as the popular setting that these dances were performed in. The dancers would use these settings to tell a story to the audience by taking on different roles and portraying them through song and dance. Another example is the second engraved print, titled "The Lad Taita, Native o Tahiti in the Dress of His Country." It shows a young servant named Taita, who joined Tupaya when Captain Cook brought him from Otaheite to Tahiti on the HMS Endeavour to act as a guide for their exploration. Tupaya was a virtuoso musician, as well as a respected figure in the Society Islands, where he traveled often and performed. In this picture, his servant Taita is playing on a nose-blown flute, which was one of the most commonly used instruments in Tahitian music before European influences took effect. It was often used in small ensemble settings, such as this one pictured in this untitled watercolor painting that Tupaya himself created. Here we see two musicians playing on nose-blown flutes in the front, as well as two percussionists. Groups such as this one depicted performed to provide entertainment for people at festivals or just on a normal day as rest from work. Now here in chronology is when we start to see the beginning of the evolution of Tahitian music as it began to be heavily impacted by European influences. When Samuel Wallis began making his own voyages in 1767, his crew was often accompanied by Christian missionaries who traveled with the mission of evangelizing the natives. At first they were met with a lot of resistance. However, when King Pomare II converted to Christianity, many began to return from their old religions and worship Christianity. And as missionaries taught the Tahitian people about their religion, they began to teach them hymns in their native language. In the 1830s and 40s, however, the indigenous culture began to research drastically, including previous styles of musical performance. This resurgence led to a fusion between the two musical styles of European and Tahitian traditions, and thus the himine was born. They combined Tahitian text and melodies with European harmonies and textures. The Tahitian people also began to learn how to write down their music in Western notation. On the left is an example of one of these himines, which was pulled from a collection that was published by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in 1928. You can see the Western influence in the harmonies, the rhythms, as well as the Christian subject matter, as this is titled, "Come, All Ye Sons of God." However, it does draw on Tahitian melodies, and the text itself was published in their language. On the right is a photograph that shows a choral group, directed by this woman in the center, singing one of these himines during a competition in 1923. This shows the longevity of this fusion between European influences and Tahitian traditional styles. Traditionally, Tahitian choral groups would be seated in a circle such as this, while singing these texts in the Tahitian language with European choral textures and arrangements. I'm going to skip forward a little bit. However, the action of indigenizing Christian hymns to promote religious changes in Tahitian culture was only the beginning. European influence persisted throughout the 19th century. In 1880, Tahiti was officially claimed as a colonial territory of France. Between the time of contact made by Samuel Wallis and the time that Tahiti was claimed as a colony, European ideals had changed drastically due to the Industrial Revolution and the Enlightenment. People were growing tired of the fast-paced, modernized city life, and they began idealizing simpler times and, quote, simpler countries. And as explorers came back from this island with reports of drawings of this tropical island and the beautiful oceans around it, many people began to view this country as exotic and primitive, someplace that had been untouched by urbanization. Enter cultural exoticism into the arena. One of the major players on this new stage of cultural exoticism was French post-impressionist painter Paul Gauguin. Like many other Europeans, he had become very disappointed with French modernist culture. In particular, he was very frustrated with the lack of symbolic depth and variety in French Impressionist art. However, later in his life, he became part of the group of artists who began to look outside of Europe for inspiration for his art. Over time, he began to reflect his mental turn from French Impressionism in his art by paying little to no attention to classical perspective and no longer employing the use of gradations in his color, which is a style known as synthesism. In 1891, he gave up entirely on European culture and escaped to French Polynesia, where he would remain for the majority of the rest of his life. Particularly, he moved to Papeete, which is the capital of Tahiti. He began recording his experiences in a journal that he published in France titled Noa Noa, the Tahitian Journal. In the initial entries, he describes how it wasn't anything like the paradise he had expected. This is because Tahiti had already been under French colonial influence for over 100 years, so he saw many shared characteristics of the society he was so desperately trying to escape. However, as he spent more time there, he saw more of the nationality, fundamental realness, and primitive beauty that still remained in the people of Tahiti. From there, he begins to describe scenes and people in a very idealized way that reflects the primitive romantic view that the French people already had of Tahiti and its people. Here's an excerpt from one of these journal entries. All the joys, animal and human, of a free life are mine. I have escaped everything that is artificial, conventional, customary. I am entering into the truth, into nature. Having the certitude of a succession of days like this present one, equally free and beautiful, peace descends on me. I develop normally and no longer occupy myself with useless vanities. He also often comments on the beauty of the native women and includes many sketches of them, either semi or fully nude. He also refers to the Tahitians as savage or simplistic, but he also exalts them over the European people both present in Tahiti and back in France. His perspective on the native people can also be found in the paintings he completed during his time in Tahiti. Similar to his sketches in Noa Noa, the subjects of his paintings were young women, often in the nude. One example of this trend is a painting he completed in 1892, titled Spirit of the Dead Watching. It features his wife, a native woman named Tehura, completely in the nude. And in this painting, she was only 14 years old, which is a very young age to be portrayed in such a provocative light. This scene was based off of a memory he had of coming home to his hut and seeing her lying on their bed nude and staring at him wide-eyed as if she were seeing a ghost. It has been suggested that she was actually looking at him that way because of his aggressive behavior towards her, and not her irrational fears. However, he painted these spots of bright colors in the background to symbolize the ghosts that he believed that she thought he was seeing, because as he wrote, the Tahitians believed that bright lights in the dark were ghosts. This painting exemplifies how Gauguin often portrayed the native Tahitians in ways that fit his own perspective rather than completely portraying the truth. As time went on, Gauguin's paintings, along with other reports from the Europeans who were living there, reached the people back in Europe. Because they had no other references to base their views on, Europeans as a whole began to subscribe to this idealized romantic view of the tiny island. And in their minds, Tahiti was a paradise that France had claimed for itself. As transportation evolved to allow for people to travel farther in less time, Europeans began to travel to Tahiti on recreational trips, and cultural tourism rose in the 20th century. As a result, music and dance began to be tailored to European audiences. Hula dancing, which is actually based on ancient Tahitian dance, which we saw earlier in this copper engraved plate, began to focus on bringing attention to the female figure that Gauguin depicted so often in his paintings. This painting was done by Romeo Washington, titled Tahitian Dance, and it clearly illuminates the difference that modern hula dancing has compared to ancient dance. The costumes have evolved to show more skin. Ancient dance techniques were very fluid in the first place, as they mimicked the waves of the ocean. But now hula dancing focuses primarily on hip movement, which still mimes the ocean waves, but it does bring the audience's focus to the feature of the female figure. This sexualization of Tahitian women, a greatly unfortunate byproduct of the cultural tourism that was rampant during this time, continues even to this day. So far, we have come to this conclusion that European colonialism has had a destructive effect on Tahitian musical identity. From the forced abandonment of Tahitian religious songs in favor of Christian hymns, to the emergence of hula dancing as a replacement for ancient dance practices, musical identity has been altered to fit European aesthetic ideals. However, in recent decades, we have fortunately seen shifts in a more positive direction. In 1977, Tahiti gained its autonomy, and they began to search for a new national musical identity post-colonialism. In 1975, the political officials in French Polynesia opened the Museum of Tahiti and the Islands. In 1981, the curator of the museum, Anne Lavendesse, wrote an article for the Museum International Journal that describes the mission of the museum. She remarks that the purpose is to secure the return of Tahitian objects from European museums to build up the collection. Because Tahiti was under French influence for so long, many of the objects that were once of huge importance to their culture was lost to the country itself, even though they were being kept in European museums overseas. An example of this is a Tahitian paddle, which Lavendesse quote says is impossible to find now. Well, almost impossible. This is shocking because being on an island, sailing was a major part of their ancient culture as they sailed in paddle boats for work, gathering food, and leisure. Unfortunately, many objects that were once commonly used in ancient Tahitian culture have been lost for over 100 years, including many of their traditional instruments. This meant that the current generations, who now had the freedom to look back towards the past, often didn't have near enough to look back on. Thus, the natives' knowledge of their ancient musical practices was lacking due to such an extended period of time under European control. Additionally, there have been many social movements to revitalize ancient Tahitian culture. One particular movement is the MUHL, which rejects Tahitian culture of the Christian and colonial period and defines tradition as customs from the pre-contact period. As you can see, there is now a shift in Tahiti to look more to their ancestors to gain inspiration for art and music. Additionally, we have seen the emergence of Tahitian artists who are drawing on their ancestral roots for their music. And these artists are actually becoming famous around the world, which is wonderful for drawing attention to and educating other people about the music of Tahiti. For example, Sabrina Laughlin has become widely popular on Polynesian radio, and her influence reaches as far as Japan. She has become an advocate for a genre of music titled whenua, which is composed of singing traditional songs and hymns with a techno beat. These songs are often from centuries ago that have been passed down orally for generations in an attempt to preserve their cultural history while under European influence. This genre reflects Tahitian motives of seeking a new natural cultural identity free from European ideals and aesthetics. In 2012, she released an album dedicated entirely to this genre. It's described as a clever mix of nostalgia thanks to beautiful Tahitian ballads of gaiety and good humor that reflect on ancient cultural ideas. The themes of this album are her land, country, culture, society, and family. Additionally, she has begun an acting career with a short film titled A l'âge d'une vie. It's a short film that has become famous as the first 100% Polynesian short film, and it was featured in the Short Film Corner of the Cannes Film Festival in 2015. It expounds upon the struggles that many Tahitians have faced, the choice between staying in Tahiti with their families or moving to another country permanently to seek prosperity and fame. In an interview done by Manon Kemunbai in 2015, she comments, "Yes, that's for sure, because I myself am very attached to my land, my family, my culture. And I also know how difficult it is to leave everything to follow your dream. In my opinion, we have all faced at a given moment the same dilemma, to follow his dream and to take risks, to be different, or to give up his dream and to choose safety, to be normal. In life, we are always brought to make decisions, and this does not happen. It's not always easy, but the most important is to not regret anything, whatever happens." While Tahiti is rebuilding its national cultural identity, it's imperative that we still recognize the damage that was done under several hundred years of European colonial control. I've had the privilege of having my eyes open to this incredible history of this country, and I'm grateful to say that I now understand that Tahiti is not just a paradise where people can sunbathe surrounded by hula dancers, white sandy beaches, and sparkling blue waters. Tahitian musical identity has been severely affected by the effects of European colonialism, and those effects are still being felt and dealt with today. Thank you so much for your time and listening to this presentation, and hope you all have a great day.